Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neera Tandon, and I am the president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. We're really excited to have you all here to have an important discussion on the challenges facing the American middle class. The middle class has long been the engine of our nation's growth, but today, millions of Americans' families are being squeezed by rising costs and stagnant wages. In fact, median household income today is still below its 2000 level. At the same time, the middle class is facing rising costs from health care, child care, college costs, which is really putting a squeeze on America's families. In fact, our sister institution, the Center for American Progress, itself has taken a deep dive into these issues. We've learned that so many American families are struggling, continue to struggle. But the point I'd like to focus on is that these trends are not inevitable. In fact, other countries do manage to ensure that their middle-class families, their incomes are rising and their costs are decreasing. There is a path forward. These issues, again, are not inevitable. We choose to allow them to happen. We choose to keep economic security out of the reach of millions of families. And that means also that we have the power to choose differently. That is why I'm so thrilled to have here today Senator Elizabeth Warren, who throughout her career, really over decades, she has been an advocate and champion for the middle-class families who feel left behind. She is, without question, one of our nation's strongest champions for middle-class families. And I have to say, just as a personal note, her advocacy over the last several years has really made her a hero, or maybe a shiro to many of us. She is a renowned expert on bankruptcy and other issues, but has really put a light on how inequality is transforming our country for the worse. Her presentation this afternoon will examine the root causes of the economic challenges we're facing and outline a series of steps to rebuild the middle class, steps that I hope all policymakers from around the country will hear. Please join me in welcoming Senator Elizabeth Warren to the stage.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Neera, for doing this. I was having a conversation with Neera a few weeks ago, and she said, "What are you working on?" And I said, "I'm actually working on a whole bunch of slides that are really a continuation of the work that I did back in my academic life." And I said, it's an experiment to see if I can talk about what's happening to America's middle class in a way that really drives through a whole story. And so Neera said, "Come over here and do it at Center for American Progress, do it with this group." And I said, "Yes, I will come and do this." So thank you for all being part of this experiment. I'm really grateful. Now, many of you probably know me as a senator. It is an amazing privilege to represent the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Some of you may know me in my days fighting for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or working to get some accountability on Wall Street. And some of you may know that before I ever got into this, I was a professor at Harvard Law School. But this has not always been my life. Growing up, for me, was pretty different from this. My parents worked really hard. My dad sold carpeting and fencing. He ended up as a maintenance man. My mom raised 4 kids. That picture there has my 3 brothers. I am the cool short one in sunglasses. You know, either you start out cool or you don't, what can I say? But we were always hanging on by our fingernails to our place in the middle class. And things got pretty bad when I was in high school. My brothers were all off in the military by then. My daddy had a heart attack. We lost our car, the medical bills piled up, and we were so close to losing our house that truly you could feel the foundation shake. We were flat out of options when my mom, who was 50 years old, took her first job. She went to work at Sears, answering phones, a minimum wage job so that we could make the mortgage payments and keep food on the table. She is the tall one in the plaid dress. She is also the one who saved our home and saved our family. But it was really, really hard, and we came really, really close to disaster. And for a lot of families, this story does not end well. For a lot of families, no matter how hard they work, no matter how many coupons they cut, no matter how hard they try to save, there is never enough to make ends meet. And for some families, African American families and Latino families, the system has been rigged for decades, so there will never be enough to make ends meet. And none of this will get any better unless we make some fundamental changes in this country. We all know that America is the great economic engine of the world. Nira made reference to this, and there have been some ups and downs. But for decades, productivity and innovation of American workers and businesses has kept our GDP on an upward climb. Many corporations today are recording record profits. The stock market is booming, inflation is low, unemployment has dropped below 5%. All of the markers of a healthy economy are in place. It looks like everything is great. But who exactly is doing great? The average two-income family today is actually in much worse shape than a one-income family was just a generation ago. Back in the early 1970s, families were doing well enough that they put almost 12% of their disposable income into savings. And revolving debt, the kind of debt you mostly have on credit cards, was just a small sliver, about 0.5%. Families had money in the bank and not much debt. And that's what we meant by a solid middle class. Today, those numbers have nearly reversed. On average, savings have been cut by 2/3 while debt has exploded. Today, families carry 15 times more debt than families did a generation ago. Less savings, more debt. Families are living on the edge of a financial cliff, and it is a long, long way down. Today, 1 in 3 Americans with a credit file is dealing with a debt collector, bills that aren't paid. 18-year-olds are taking on tens of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. Last year, nearly 1 million families filed for bankruptcy. That is almost the same as the total number of households in all of Miami-Dade County. But the American economy may look great from the outside, but for the families living inside, this economy looks very different. So the question is, how did this happen? Why did families pick up so much debt? How did they get squeezed so hard? Well, there have been some big changes. Back in the 1970s, for example, less than half of women with children were working. Today, that number is above 70%. Now, it hasn't quite doubled what families are earning, but it certainly means that on average, these families have a lot more income. So that should be the good news. If we're earning more, why are we in so much debt? Now, the easy explanation here is let's just blame ourselves. It's too many fancy cars, too many new iPhones, eating out too much. Most people assume that America's debt problems come from wasteful spending. Here's the thing about that. It is just not true. In fact, over the last 30 years or so, families have actually cut a lot of their spending. Adjusted for inflation, the average family today is spending less on food, and yes, that includes eating out, less on clothing, less on furniture, less on appliances than they did a generation ago. And the numbers are just pretty conclusive on this. Your Aunt Edna may shake her finger at young families today, but the data show that American families are not hooping off their money. They've watched their nickels, but boy, have they been slammed by the big stuff. The big fixed expenses are staggering. Families spend 57% more on their homes, 104% more on insurance. College, even at a state school, is through the roof. A kid today will pay tuition and fees nearly 3 times higher than they paid in the 1970s. And with more parents of small children headed off for long work hours, the cost of childcare is enough to rock back almost any family. Look at it. I have to hit it again. It is no wonder that American families have blown through any savings and taken on debt. After they deal with big fixed costs, there's just not much left over for them to work with. Now, these changes in spending mean that families today face a whole lot more risk. You know, think about it this way. When my parents needed extra money for something like car repairs or school shoes for my brothers and me, they cut back a little bit on everyday items to get by. And when my daddy got sick, my mother could go to work to help pay our bills. It was a minimum wage job, but it was all new money. Today's families just don't have that flexibility. They can't cut back on their health insurance or their child care. Lots of families have only one parent, and even two-parent families. When something goes wrong, when someone gets sick or work hours get cut or somebody loses a job, they don't have a way to get another paycheck, a new paycheck in to make this up. Instead, they end up taking on a ton of credit card debt or going belly up on their mortgage. So how did this happen? What changed? And the answer is simpler and more maddening than you might think. What changed? Policy changed. We changed our policies. We went from a country that strengthened the middle class families to one that bet on its wealthiest citizens and hoped that the benefits would eventually trickle down on everyone else. So here's the story. From the 1790s to the 1930s, we were basically a boom and bust economy. Things would go well and the economy would grow for a number of years, then inevitably another depression would hit, and American families would struggle with lost jobs and lost incomes. But when the Great Depression hit, you can see the one in 1929, we pulled up our socks and said, we can do better than this. We can build a better country than this and a better economy. We passed laws that made us all safer, and we created some real opportunities. First, we decided to regulate the big banks. Glass-Steagall, FDIC insurance, and the SEC helped us make sure that these crises wouldn't happen again. Second, we decided to invest in ourselves, in our people. We invested in education through programs like the GI Bill and NDEA loans and world-class public universities. We built up our infrastructure, created a national highway system. We invested in ambitious research like DARPA and space shots. We built Social Security and Medicare because we said we'd all pitch in together to make sure that after a lifetime of work, people could retire with dignity. We strengthened the right to join a union so workers could share in the wealth that they produced. Now let me be clear, things were not perfect. Systematic racism, sexism, homophobia, bigotry meant that opportunities weren't spread around equally. But over time, we were bending in the right direction. And these government investments in education and infrastructure let us turn our hard work into real success. Before 1980, we made a real effort through our government to invest in the country's future. We spent money, I picked two examples here, on education and research, areas that benefited huge portions of our population. All of us together, through government, helped create opportunities. And it worked. Before 1980, 90% of Americans, all those guys wearing baseball caps, and yes, I did pick Boston Red Sox, got 70% of all the new income that was generated. Not perfect, but pretty darn good. This was an America where people could afford to go to work and have a family. This was an America where I could go to college for $50 a semester. This was an America where my mother could support a family on a minimum wage job. Does anyone in this room think that that could happen today? Build a secure life, send the kids to college for $50 a semester, and minimum wage. Today, a minimum wage job won't support a mama and a baby in a one-room apartment. The reality of America's middle-class life today is very different than it was in my parents' era or even in mine. And that change is the direct result of some very deliberate policy decisions made by our government. The decision to invest in the richest Americans. So, part one of trickle down was to rewrite the tax laws. Swayed by lobbyists and campaign donations, politicians in Washington decided that the wealthiest families should pay lower rates on taxes than middle-class families. Tax loopholes made it profitable for multinationals to go overseas. Giant corporations could stash their money in foreign countries and let small businesses here at home be the ones to pay the full freight. With all these tax loopholes in place, it was easy then for Republicans to say, I'm sorry, there's just no money for the other stuff. And if we're going to be honest, it wasn't just the Republicans. It was a lot of Democrats, too. And the result? It was just exactly what you would expect. We aren't making the investments in the things we really need. Our infrastructure is crumbling. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives it a grade of D+. That's D as in dog, plus. As a portion of GDP, our spending on research and development is down more than a third. And what about education? That great ticket to the middle class. Well, Head Start and public education is not a priority for those who can send their kids to private preschools and expensive colleges. Making sure that our kids get a good education, all our kids, including African American kids and non-English speaking kids and special needs kids, takes money. And those tax cuts have been felt somewhere. The same is true in higher ed, where the costs of an education are going up, up, up. But government support at state schools is now down more than 20%. After years of underfunding higher ed, it is no surprise that student loan debt is exploding. Now, the second big trickle-down change was to fire the cops. Not the cops on Main Street, but the cops on Wall Street. It was called deregulation. But what it really meant was a lot of powerful corporations could do what they wanted, and no one was going to stop them. Laws to keep banking separate from investing were repealed, and the SEC was neutered. Without a cop on the beat, Wall Street got even more greedy and more reckless. They built business models based on cheating people on mortgages, on credit cards, on payday loans. They loaded up on risks and put the whole economy in danger. And we know how this turned out. In 2008, we had the greatest economic crash since the Great Depression. Now, all of these changes were really bad for hardworking families. But there was one more that truly cemented these problems. The system itself was corrupted to serve the wealthy and powerful. Today, most politicians are not working for the average American family. They are working for the donors who support their campaigns. They are serving the lobbyists who roam the halls of the U.S. Capitol. Billions of dollars flow into the pockets of American politicians to tilt them in favor of continuing this support to the wealthy. And it's not just campaign contributions, it is so much more. Look at lobbying. No one has the exact numbers for the early 1980s, but it's estimated that politically active organizations spent about $200 million a year on direct lobbying. Now, that is a lot of money. But by 2002, that number had skyrocketed to $1.8 billion. And by 2012, it had reached the shocking number of $3.3 billion. Adjusted for inflation, that is 7 times more money than they spent 30 years ago. And about 3/4 of it benefits no one but corporate America. CEOs have realized that spending millions on lobbyists will yield billions on profits. And campaign contributions and lobbying are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to corporate influence. Business executives and government officials spin through a revolving door, making sure that the interests of powerful corporations are always protected. Giant Wall Street businesses offer millions of dollars to their high-ranking executives to work in Washington for a few years, making policies to benefit exactly the same Wall Street businesses that sent them there. And corporations and trade groups fund study after study that just so happen to support the special rule or the exception that the industry is looking for. And that is why, despite tons of evidence showing how bad these policies are for working families, nothing changes. Remember the number showing that from 1935 to 1980, as total income increased across the country, that the 90%, everybody outside the 10%, the guys in the baseball caps, got 70% of all new income generated. Those days are gone. From 1980 to 2016, total income kept right on growing, but now it was divided very differently. Remember the number showing that from here we go, one more. Come on, baby. This is the risk of trying to do these with slides. There we go. Since 1980, the share of new income that went to the 90% was almost zero. Think about that. Nothing, not even 1%. If you look, I'm going to keep doing this. If you look at market income, the income that individuals earn before taxes and the government and before government transfers like Social Security, the top 10% has taken all of the new income growth since 1980. Think about that. 35 years, and it's all gone to the same place. And for African American families, dragged down by more than a century of systematic racism, the wealth gap actually got worse under trickle down. I'm going to give you just one stat on this. From 1984, 25 years, from 1984 to 2009, the wealth gap between black and white families actually tripled in that time period. This economy is growing, but it is growing only for those at the very top. Everyone else is left out. And here's what makes this story really scary. A government that works just for those at the top is a government that can't address other problems, some of the biggest problems that we're facing. Look, the world is heating up, and climate change could destroy much of our land and our oceans. But so long as big coal and big oil are calling the shots in Washington, there won't be any changes. Trade deals force U.S. workers to compete head-on with imprisoned workers and child labor in Guatemala and Jordan. But so long as multinational corporations can call the shots in our trade negotiations, that won't change. And a tech boom, a tech boom is leaving millions of people scrambling to piece together enough work to support themselves. But so long as Washington lobbyists keep the Labor Department at bay, people will work harder and harder for less and less. We face big problems, really big problems. But the biggest problem we face is political. Deliberate government policies that once favored working people now favor a privileged class, billionaires and giant multinational companies. But there's actually good news in this story. If the government has been taken over by the rich and the powerful, then the rest of us can take it back. We can make our government change its priorities and once again serve American families and build a future for ourselves and our children. We need to be making regulations that create a level playing field between the big guys and the little guys, and we need to enforce the law for everyone. You know, right now, a kid who gets caught with a few ounces of drugs could be looking at jail time, but a CEO who helps his bank launder billions of dollars of drug money actually gets a bonus. That is not right. We need to be investing in education from preschool to college to build opportunities for our kids. We need to be investing in clean energy infrastructure to help create new technology, new jobs, and a healthier planet. We need to be investing in medical and scientific research because curing cancer and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's brings down the long-term costs of healthcare. And more importantly, it helps the people we love. Is this realistic? So come on, I stand up here and talk about these things. Could we actually do any of these things? Could we make these investments without just going broke? Would we just bankrupt ourselves? Well, I'm going to tell you, I don't think we would bankrupt ourselves, and I'll tell you why. There are lots of examples, but I'm just going to pick one example. If we got rid of the tax loophole allowing corporations to write off obscene multi-million-dollar executive bonuses as a business expense, that would mean $55 billion over the next 10 years. It's not the biggest loophole, but closing this one loophole would be enough to give people on Social Security, seniors, veterans, Americans with disabilities, the same percentage pay that top CEOs got last year. It's just about enough to let almost every young person with college loans refinance at a lower rate. It would be enough to completely replace every water pipe in Flint, Michigan, and 67 other cities. It would be nearly enough to double the amount that NIH spends on both Alzheimer's and cancer. Now multiply what we get from closing one loophole to about 20 other giant loopholes, and think about what we could do if we just said that this country and this tax system should work for America's working people. This isn't pie in the sky. These are changes that the majority of Americans support. Now, I know if you watch the news, you probably think there is nothing in America that has more than 50% support. And it is true. There are real issues that divide us and divide us deeply. But these issues, these core how we build a future issues, they bring us together. Raise the minimum wage, refinance student loans, support child care, adopt family leave, pass equal pay for equal work, regulate the banks, expand Social Security. National surveys tell us that somewhere between 60 and 75% of all Americans support these changes. The progressive agenda isn't a Democratic agenda or a Republican agenda. It is an American agenda. It's Congress that is wildly out of step with the American people. Out of step because too many elected officials have sold out to corporate money and corporate lobbyists. So remember, the next time you hear something about gridlock, keep in mind, gridlock is working for somebody. Special interests have invested millions and millions of dollars to keep things just the way they are. Don't close the loopholes. Don't hold Wall Street CEOs responsible for breaking the law. Don't shut down the dirtiest coal plants in the country. These lobbyists and PR machines have done an incredible job of convincing most Americans that the situation we're in today is inevitable, and there's nothing they can do to make a difference. But we can make a difference. They might have money and power, but we have our voices and our votes. Now look, this fight is going to be uphill, but if we don't fight, we can't win. And we can win. I've seen it happen. After the financial crash, the big banks spent more than $1 million a day to block financial reforms, including the establishment of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But we won. And now the CFPB is out there doing its job, already forcing those big banks to return more than $11 billion directly to the people that they cheated. Now that is government that works for the people. And there's action at the state and local level. 17 states are raising the minimum wage in 2016, including a bunch of states with Republican governors. Making government work for us won't happen overnight, but change is possible. And it starts with our government, the one we own. Republicans make government the brunt of jokes. And sure, government gets things wrong sometimes. But you know, there is a big difference between a government that tries to work for us and needs help getting it better, and a government that's just plain old working for somebody else. Look at it this way. A weak government can't police Wall Street. A starving government can't invest in students. A torn government can't move decisively against climate change. A captured government can't cut a better trade deal. Without government, we don't build a stronger nation. And without government, we don't push each other to become a better people. Look, I am not naive. I have been through my share of fights. We all have. We know there are a lot of powerful interests lined up against us. And a lot of times, we don't win. But the worst thing we can do is lay down without a fight. You can't win what you don't fight for, and you can't make progress if you don't aim high. Our future is worth fighting for, and I hope you will join in this fight because you already have everything you need to make a difference. Raise your voice. If you see things that are broken, tell people. Call your elected officials and give them an earful. Tell your friends and family to do the same. Change starts when we take the time to tell our skeptical uncle or our sister why they should care about the prospects of America's families and what they can do to help. And raise your hand. Volunteer for change, whether it's to get someone elected, to get a law passed, or to join with others to persuade Congress to do something. And look, I know that's asking a lot, especially if you're already struggling and there are barely enough hours in the day for your work and the people you love. But democracy won't survive on its own. It needs people to participate. And one more really important thing. Raise questions before you ever vote again. Don't let people who represent you skate by without taking a stand on exactly who they plan to work for. So I'm going to start with four questions that everyone, regardless of political power, regardless of political party, should be forced to answer. First, will you fight to overturn Citizens United and reduce the influence of giant corporations and billionaires? Second, will you put more cops on Wall Street and tell them to hold corporate executives personally liable when they break the law? Third, will you commit to raise more tax revenue from the top 10% to support education and infrastructure and research spending? And fourth, will you strengthen the safety net for all workers, full-time, part-time, gig, and independent contractors, with higher Social Security, family and medical leave, and health care, and a real chance to join a union? There's more to do than just those four, but these four questions start with taking back our government and making a commitment to a future that works, not just for the wealthy few, but one that works for all our people. It's not going to be easy. In fact, it's probably going to be pretty hard. When I was a young mom on my own, I used to dye my hair brown. And I was trying to start a career. There were days I thought I wasn't going to make it. But I got really lucky. My Aunt Bee helped with the kids, and the second time around, I married the right guy. But I could build something in my life because I lived in an America that gave people second chances. An America where you could pick yourself up and you could try again. An America of growing opportunities. And that is how the daughter of a maintenance man and a minimum wage worker at Sears could end up in the United States Senate. Because America invested in kids like me. I believe in that America, and I believe we can build a future, not just for some of our kids, but for all of our kids. And that's what this is all about. So thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing. Thank you.